There is something strange that happens when things start to go well. You have been working towards something for a long time. A new job, a healthier relationship, a version of yourself that feels more whole, and then slowly the pieces begin to align. The thing you wanted starts to arrive, and instead of relief, instead of the quiet satisfaction you imagined, you feel something else entirely, a low hum of anxiety, a sudden urge to sabotage, a strange impulse to return to exactly what you were trying to leave. Most people interpret this as weakness, as proof that they don't really want what they said they wanted, or that they are broken in some fundamental way that other people are not. But that interpretation misses something important. What you are feeling in that moment is not weakness. It is your nervous system doing precisely what it was designed to do. It is protecting you from the unknown, and the unknown to your brain includes the future version of yourself that you are trying to become. To understand why this happens, you have to understand something about how the brain actually works beneath the level of conscious thought. Your brain is not primarily an organ of reason, it is an organ of prediction. Its central task from the moment you were born has been to build accurate models of how the world works so that it can anticipate what comes next and keep you alive. Every experience you have ever had has been cataloged. Every emotional pattern you lived through in childhood, every relationship that taught you what love looks like, every environment that taught you whether the world is safe or threatening, all of it became data. All of it shaped what your nervous system learned to recognize as normal. And normal to the brain is not a judgment. It is not good or bad. It is simply familiar. It is the set of conditions the brain has learned to navigate without expending enormous amounts of energy. It is the known territory on the map. The unfamiliar is not on the map, and your brain treats unmapped territory with the same caution it would treat physical danger. Because for most of human evolutionary history, the unfamiliar often was dangerous. The tribe you knew was safe. The territory you knew had food and water. What lay beyond it was genuinely uncertain in ways that could kill you. That ancient architecture is still running inside you now. It does not know you live in a different world. It does not know that the unfamiliar thing you are moving toward is not a threat but an opportunity. It only knows that it cannot predict the outcome. And unpredictability to a nervous system shaped by survival feels like danger. This is why you keep returning to the same emotional environments, not because you are weak, not because you lack ambition, but because your nervous system has learned to function inside a particular emotional climate, and it has come to treat that climate as home, even when that home is painful, even when you consciously know that you deserve something better. Think about the person who grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where affection was unpredictable, where they had to earn the emotional safety that should have simply been given. That person grows up knowing how to navigate that particular emotional landscape. They know its rhythms. They know what behaviors produce what responses. They know how to survive inside it. And then, as an adult, they find themselves in relationship after relationship that recreates that same basic dynamic. They are drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable. They feel vaguely uneasy around people who are consistently warm and stable. They sometimes describe the relationships that are actually healthy as somehow too easy, not quite right, lacking in chemistry, and they are telling the truth because to their nervous system, love has always had a particular shape. That shape includes uncertainty, unpredictability, the need to perform or earn or wait. When love arrives without those qualities, the brain cannot fully recognize it. It doesn't fit the model. Stability feels foreign, and foreign feels wrong. This is not a conscious preference. It is not what the person would choose if you sat them down and asked them plainly. Of course, they want reliable, consistent love. Of course, they want to stop feeling anxious in their closest relationships. But what they consciously want and what their nervous system is calibrated to seek are two entirely different things. And in the conflict between the two, the nervous system almost always wins. The same pattern operates in every domain of life, not just relationships. There is the person who repeatedly finds themselves in jobs that undervalue them, who consistently earns just below what they know they're capable of producing, who talks about wanting financial stability but makes a long series of decisions that keep that stability just out of reach. There is the person who begins every attempt at self improvement with genuine enthusiasm, reaches a certain point of progress, and then, predictably, finds a way to return to the starting position. Who has watched themselves do this enough times that they have begun to suspect that something deeper than laziness is operating? There is the person who starts to succeed at the thing they said they wanted most, and then, in the moment when the thing is actually within reach, experiences something very close to terror. These are not isolated failures of willpower. They are the same phenomenon expressing itself across different areas of the same life. The brain, in each case, is maintaining a coherent emotional set point. It is keeping the person inside the identity range it has come to recognize as home. There is a concept in neuroscience and psychology that becomes very useful here. The idea that the brain is constantly generating predictions about what will happen next, and that it experiences a kind of quiet distress whenever reality deviates significantly from those predictions in either direction. In either direction. This is important. The brain does not simply find negative surprises distressing. It can also find positive ones destabilizing, because what the brain is actually trying to do is maintain an accurate model. And a sudden large deviation from the model, even a welcome one, requires the brain to update, to revise its understanding of what is normal, to recalibrate. That process of recalibration is uncomfortable. It requires energy and uncertainty. And the brain, which is always trying to conserve resources and minimize unpredictability, will sometimes resist it, will sometimes generate internal pressure to return to the previous model, not because the previous model was better, but because it was known. This is part of why success can feel strange and destabilizing when it arrives. The person who has spent years believing they are someone who struggles financially suddenly receives a significant financial opportunity. The brain, which has organized an entire identity around the experience of scarcity, finds the new condition disorienting, not because financial stability is bad, but because it doesn't fit the existing model of the self. The brain has to choose between updating the model or rejecting the data, and rejecting the data is, in the short term, considerably easier. This is also where some of the hidden rewards of staying the same become visible, because staying the same is not simply the absence of change, it carries actual psychological benefits, real reasons to remain that operate beneath the surface of conscious thought. There is belonging. If you come from a family, a community, a social environment where a certain level of struggle or limitation is shared, then moving beyond that level can feel like a form of departure. Not a departure from a place, but from an identity, from the shared story of who your people are. The person who becomes financially successful when everyone around them has struggled with money often experiences a kind of guilt that seems disproportionate. But it is not really about money. It is about the fear of becoming unrecognizable to the people they love, of becoming other, of the implicit question, if I change this much, do I still belong here? There is also the protection that a limited identity offers against the full weight of personal responsibility. If you believe that your circumstances are shaped primarily by forces outside yourself, by luck, by background, by what was done to you, then you are also protected from the more demanding conclusion, the one that says you have more agency than you have been using, that the story you have been telling about why change is impossible may not be entirely accurate. That realization is genuinely frightening because it means that the future is more open than you thought, and open futures require decisions. Decisions require responsibility, and responsibility means that the outcomes, whatever they are at least partly yours to account for. Staying inside the familiar limitation is, in a strange way, a protection against that weight. Then there is the question of self help. There is an enormous amount of content in the world designed to help people change. Books about habits and mindset and productivity and healing. Videos about the psychology of success and the neuroscience of behavior and the ancient wisdom of living well. Most people who are genuinely struggling with the patterns described in this conversation have consumed some portion of this material, and they will tell you that it makes sense, that they understand it, that they find it insightful and clarifying. And they will also, if they are honest, tell you that understanding it has not fundamentally altered the pattern. This is one of the more important and under-examined dynamics in the entire self-help ecosystem. Knowledge is not transformation. This is not an argument against learning. It is an observation about what learning alone cannot do. The brain can hold information about how patterns form and why they persist while simultaneously maintaining the very patterns that information describes. Understanding the psychology of avoidance does not, on its own, change the nervous system's tendency to avoid. Understanding the neuroscience of self-sabotage does not prevent the next episode of self-sabotage, because the pattern is not located primarily in conscious understanding. It is located in the body, in the automatic responses that activate before thought arrives, in the emotional temperature that feels like home. And this is a level of the self that is not particularly moved by intellectual insight alone. More than that, consuming self-help content can actually create the sensation of progress without requiring any of the discomfort that real progress involves. You finish an insightful piece of content and you feel informed. You feel like something has shifted. And that feeling, however pleasant, can quietly replace the harder work of actually changing. The insight becomes the destination rather than the doorway. So, what does actual change require? It requires something that cannot be delivered through information alone. It requires repeated exposure to the discomfort that comes with acting against the grain of the familiar identity. Not once, not in a moment of high motivation, but consistently across time, through the resistance that the nervous system generates when you begin to move into unmapped territory. Real change involves a period that is genuinely uncomfortable, not because it has to be made difficult artificially, but because the brain is experiencing something it was designed to treat as a warning signal. The absence of the familiar feels in the nervous system like loss, like instability, sometimes like danger. This discomfort is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is a sign that you are actually doing it. The person who has always undercharged for their work and begins asking for what they are actually worth will likely feel a persistent low level anxiety during that transition. Not because asking for fair compensation is wrong, but because the familiar identity, the one organized around not quite valuing yourself enough, is being revised. The brain is recalibrating. The discomfort is the recalibration. The person who has organized their emotional life around unavailable partners and begins to genuinely invest in a stable relationship will likely experience moments of restlessness, moments where the calm feels suspicious rather than comforting, where the absence of familiar emotional chaos reads as indifference rather than safety. This is not evidence that the relationship is wrong. It is evidence that the nervous system is learning a new language of love that it has not spoken before. The discomfort is not the obstacle, it is the process. And underneath all of this is a question about identity, because the deepest reason people do not change is not that they lack information or motivation or opportunity. It is that the person they would need to become feels like a stranger. And becoming a stranger to yourself, even in the direction of something better, requires a kind of courage that is rarely discussed. The old identity, however painful, has one quality that the new identity cannot yet offer. It is known. You know how to be that person. You know that person's rhythms and habits and familiar disappointments. There is a perverse comfort in it. The misery is at least legible. The new identity, the one on the other side of the pattern, is not yet real. It has no history, no texture, no evidence that you can actually sustain it. And moving toward it means moving through a period where the old self has been left behind, but the new self has not yet been fully inhabited. A kind of psychological in between space that has no familiar landmarks. Most people retreat from that space not because the destination is unwanted, but because the in between is genuinely disorienting. Here is what can be said quietly at the end of all of this: the real obstacle has almost certainly never been what you thought it was. Not the circumstances, not the people around you, not the absence of the right information or the right moment or the right motivation. It has been the nervous system's loyalty to a version of you that was built in a different time, under different conditions, for different survival needs. A version of you that served its purpose, that got you through. But that was never meant to be permanent. Transformation, real transformation, not the kind that comes from a burst of motivation or a weekend of insight, begins with a very specific and quiet willingness. The willingness to let the familiar feel of the old identity become uncomfortable in a new way, not to destroy it, not to condemn it, but to stop organizing everything around its protection, to be willing to feel uncertain, ungrouped, temporarily unfamiliar to yourself, in the service of becoming someone who is not yet fully formed, but is somehow more true. That willingness does not come from knowing more. It comes from something older and quieter than knowledge. It comes from the moment when the cost of staying the same finally, genuinely, begins to outweigh the fear of becoming different. And when that moment arrives, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet internal shift, that is where it actually starts, not in the content you consumed, not in the insight you had, in the decision to stop making yourself comfortable inside a story that no longer fits.